head of the U.S. military. The secrecy involved in all matters pertaining to the Roswell incident was unparalleled. The classification was, from the outset, above top secret. So the vast majority of U.S. officials and politicians, let alone a mere allied Minister of Defense, were never in the loop. Furthermore, when the alien technology was fed to U.S. industry, at no time was the source revealed. Colonel Corso had the perfect cover. It was foreign technology that he was providing. Ostensibly, something picked up from the Soviets or the Germans. No questions were allowed, and no explanations were given. And as you might expect in a country with three separate military services, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force did not share their secrets. Each held their projects very close to the vest. The U.S. Army projects, initiated by Colonel Corso, resulted in reverse engineering that led to developments that included today's integrated circuit chips, fiber optics, lasers, and super tenacity fibers, just to name a few. These are all developments that had a profound effect on our lives as Earthlings. Two or three of my friends have asked me if I didn't think that the day after Roswell could be just some brilliant work of fiction. My answer was no. Not even with the imagination of someone like Jan Martel, author of The Life of Pi, could anyone take it. The book is replete with too many real names, real places, and real dates to be fiction. Last summer, when I was reading it at a local lodge, I shared a few of the comments with my nephew Philip. Not having read the book, he was more than a little skeptical. A couple of days later, he phoned a retired United States Air Force general of his acquaintance to ask him about the book. Every word of it is true and more, the general told him. That was enough to satisfy Philip, who could hardly wait to get his hands on a copy of the book. Last Tuesday, I decided it would be good to hear that assurance firsthand. So I phoned the general, who Philip had introduced me to at an aviation exhibition a few years ago. He seemed pleased to hear from me. So I asked him about the quote concerning Corso's book. Every word of it is true and more. He repeated for my benefit. We then spent 20 minutes or so discussing the quote and more, end quote, to the extent that he could without revealing classified material. What he said was just as fascinating and just as compelling as the book. UFOs are as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. That is my unequivocal conclusion. But that conclusion alone would not have been enough to convince me to speak out today. Others will be saying the same thing, and some of them better. The reason I'm going public today is because there are profoundly important policy questions that must be addressed. And I'm a policy wonk, someone who thinks with a broad brush. There's a problem for Earthlings. Within hours of the crash of Roswell, U.S. General Nathan Twyman designated the visitors as enemy aliens. It appears from his book, The Colonel Corso agreed with that assessment, but it has remained as official U.S. policy ever since. At that time, however, it was an enemy, quote unquote, about which the U.S. could do nothing, because the visitors were so technologically superior. That led to the recommendation that the discovery be treated with the utmost secrecy, to the point that the crash of Roswell didn't happen and that UFOs don't exist. The rationale was that the ordinary public couldn't cope with the news and might easily panic. Reference was made to Orson Welles' Halloween broadcast depicting a Martian invasion, which had been so realistic that it created a sort of panic. The best way to prevent a recurrence is to keep the public in the dark and unaware. This policy resulted in what has probably been the greatest and most successful cover-up in the history of the world. But much has happened in the more than a half century since that policy was adopted. The most important change has been in the U.S. military capability. The U.S. has developed the aliens' own weapons, lasers and particle guns, to the point where they can be used against the visitors from space. In his book, Colonel Corso makes it clear that the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative, appropriately dubbed Star Wars, was primarily designed for use against the alien intruders. His contemporary successor, the anti-missile defense system, is also being designed with that as one of its principal objectives. It is true that a case can be made for attempting to provide a shield against the Russians and Chinese, although everyone knows that the Russians are not going to embark on a policy that would result in their total destruction. It is equally true that they, too, are aware of the visitors and know that the perceived threat for the visitors has been a major consideration in the planning of the anti-missile system. Particle guns, for example, are not only useful against missiles, they have the potential to destroy the electromagnetic propulsion and navigation systems of the space vehicles, just as lightning was considered the likely cause of the crash of Roswell. The policy question is this: is it wise to be spending so much time and money building a capability designed to rid the skies of alien invaders? And what are the consequences, or the potential consequences, in the event that we should shoot down a few of them? A related question that I have been asking myself is, to what extent are they really an enemy? What crimes have they committed against humanity? They have certainly upset the military by flying over their most secret installations, by shadowing their planes, by buzzing their astronauts. But these are all things that the superpowers would do to each other given capability. Beyond that, the aliens have mutilated a few cattle and allegedly abducted a few people and frightened them badly. But to the best of my knowledge, they have not killed anyone. So, are they really enemy or merely legitimate explorers from afar? These are extremely important questions, but with few answers due to the lack of information. It seems highly ironic that as I sat down to begin writing this a week ago this afternoon, that when I broke for supper and turned on the radio, the first time I heard was that NASA was going back to the moon in 2018 rather. Instantly, I said to myself, the Bush administration has finally agreed to let the military build a forward base on the moon.